So the People's Joker. It's not like Todd Phillips' Joker or any other Joker. It's very much its own thing, considering that it is a film based on the DC Comics villain that was not approved by Warner Brothers or DC Comics. It was pretty much a parody of the DC Comics characters with like Joker and Batman and all that, but used within the framework of a coming-of-age story about a transgender woman. And it is as wild, bonkers, and radically imaginative as you would think it is for this type of film, for like being so defiant of what you would expect from a comic book movie. So it was directed by Vera Drew, who also co-wrote the script. And from what I understand, like the film, the idea for this film, I think, started off as, looking at Todd Phillips' The Joker, and Vera Drew, who is an editor, she decided that she would, kind of re-edit it, try to make a different version of it. And then apparently that expanded into re-editing all of the Batman movies into like a different version of like this depiction of Batman and the Joker. And then it just kind of ballooned more and more and more, and it just ended up becoming this kind of this strange, odd, and yet weirdly heartfelt film about, the coming of age transgender experience. And the fact that Vera Drew like kept chugging along making this film, and defying like the backlash that she was going to get from the studios for making a film like this, is so damn admirable. And what's great about it, and I mean, just on those merits alone, the film would be fascinating to watch. And I'm sure just describing it that way, a lot of people are already like, I gotta watch this right now. And the good news is that beyond just like that gimmick of like the controversy that arose with it, it's not a situation where it's like what's that, like that film Escape from Tomorrowland, where it was like like guerrilla filmmaking, and it was gonna be in defiance of Disney to make this film criticizing Disney, but it wasn't a very good film in that regard. The People's Joker, however, I think it's surprising that it manages to maintain this level of earnest heart to it, by making you like care for this character and making it very like relatable, but also like very blunt and bold with like what it's trying to say. That it resonates beyond just like it doesn't get lost in the pastiche of like trippy comic book visuals that they throw into this film. Because it's just it's wild how this film goes about. So Vera Drew plays this character called Vera, who starts off as Drew, who like before she transitions into a woman, she narrates her own story here about how she grew up, wanting to be a woman, having those urges, and then having them squashed by Dr. Crane, who gave her this this basically like the Joker gas, but as a means of like kind of like laughing to like repress those urges and those feelings that like you don't feel comfortable with like within your own gender. And I guess I should mention, I didn't really give a warning about this, but I mentioned Dr. Crane there. Obviously he's the Scarecrow. There is a lot of Batman characters who are in this film, and they are retooled in the most brilliant ways possible. Like there are so many. Like Tim Heidecker voices a version of Perry White, who is basically Alex Jones, who talks about like the reptilian agenda and like socialists and Marxists and like transgender reptilians who are going to infiltrate Gotham. You have like, in terms of like Batman, he's portrayed as this kind of like a closeted like gay dude who's become a bit of like a far-right recluse a little bit. He's mostly off to the side just because like he's they portray him as more as like someone who's like more of like an enabler of abuse, but he's it's a little bit more like the Harley Quinn show, where he's kind of like he's there, he's in the background, but he's not as present unless like he's important to like the story that's being weaved here. So the whole premise of the film is that Vera has come to Gotham to become a stand-up comedian. The problem is, though, that within this weird world, comedy is illegal, and the only way to do comedy is through this sketch comedy show called I forget what it stands for, but it's basically called the UCB, and it's headed up by Lorne Michaels, which is a great like 1-2 punch there of like, you know, Lorne Michaels from Saturday Night Live and UCB being the Upright Citizens Brigade. It stands for something different in the film, but it's very clever how they go about setting up this sketch comedy show. So basically, Vera wants to prove herself and wants to make it as a comedian, but she feels like she can only do that as Drew by still, like, you know, repressing, you know who she really is. And she's kind of given a little bit of tutelage by Ra's al Ghul, who in this case is played up as a clown by David Lieberhart. And I gotta say, I think like Lieberhart really works for this type of role, because he's mainly there to kind of be like a comedic sage, there to offer like kind of like a wisdom and this kind of like weird prophecy about a clown who will come to like, you know, change Gotham forever. So I think, you know, like Lieberhart's great at doing that kind of like dry comedy here, and I like that they have him like being very dry with the comedy here. Like he's not trying too hard for laughs. And I think that works for that type of character. But, you know, Vera is not feeling that she's, you know, respected enough, that she doesn't feel like she has found her voice as a comedian. So she decides to defy all that by hooking up with the Penguin, who's kind of portrayed a little bit more of like a slacker and a little bit of like a comedian who's not quite there. They decide to team up with a whole bunch of other villains to set up their own anti-comedy club, in which they want to, you know, tell jokes that are not really that funny, but also jokes that are very dark, and like stuff that would not be as acceptable for like, you know, like a sketch comedy show, like, you know, like Saturday Night Live. So very much like a big defiance there. And even then, even when like Vera sets this up with like other people who are also feeling like outsiders and don't quite feel like they're acceptable, that they're accepted for the work that they do, Vera still struggles. She struggles to find her, you know, her voice and how she wants to be more of herself. And it's only through this film's version of the Joker, which is Mr. J, which is basically, not even basically, it is the Jared Leto Joker from Suicide Squad. It's not actually Jared Leto, don't worry, it's not, the film doesn't get that weird. But yeah, like the version of Suicide Squad Joker does show up here and hooks up with Vera. They end up forming a relationship because they at first, like they seem to relate to each other. They're both outsiders, you know, they both, you know, chosen this kind of like this life of comedy. They lean into like the clown angle. And of course, you know, there's the relation of how, you know, Vera ends up being like a trans woman, and Joker in this sense is a trans man. So it feels like they relate to each other, but I love the fact that they set this relationship up and then kind of like shows the more nuanced angle of how this could be like a toxic relationship. Because when a lot of people look at, you know, like the relationship between Joker and Harley Quinn, you know, it is a toxic relationship, but it's in like the most like obvious way possible. Within the People's Joker, it's set up in a way that, you know, like a lot of stuff in this film, it's meant to be more earnest and believable and relatable. Like Joker doesn't just like, he doesn't beat Vera, but he does like become like emotionally abusive, and he manipulates her, and, you know, he kind of directs trauma away from her. And I love how like Vera takes control of her story from this angle by laying out the groundwork of how, you know, like this was a toxic relationship and what led to it, while making some snarky comments about how you probably shouldn't get into a relationship with a comedian. And it's weird because like there is a lot of like wry comedy here, but it feels like it's coming from some place that's earnest, that's being honest about it. Like it's not just trying too hard for jokes. Like it feels like the jokes all do have a bit of kernel of truth to them and a bluntness to them that makes it so refreshing. that a film like this could try all this bizarre, this bizarre but also like blunt stuff. Like there's no hiding behind subtext for like the transgender experience here. It's text. It's taking charge of the story and saying, no, this is a story about Vera who ends up, you know, kind of asserting herself, not just as a transgender woman, but also as, you know, defining her, you know, her identity and what she wants for this world. Because in the end, she ends up just not being like, she does kind of start off a little bit like Harlequin the more she gets involved with Mr. J. But then she ends up becoming kind of like an amalgamation of both as like Joker the Harley Quinn. Which is more or less the title that she has by the end of the film. And there is so much to talk about. I could talk about this film for hours, but I'm trying to like focus in on like the stuff that I want to talk about. There's a lot of clever usage, I think, of different villains here. I like that. I like how they frame like kind of like Poison Ivy as kind of like being a little bit of a as being like a little bit of like a non-binary CGI character, who, you know, like I love how like they lean into like her character by showcasing that she was someone who cared very much about the environment, but was wronged by Gotham, and Bruce Wayne plays a part in that, and that has led to her troubled life. Because I think like for a lot of people who might be reactionaries to this type of film, I think it's worth noting that Vera Drake plays around with like a lot of different DC Comics characters, and a lot that I wouldn't expect to be in this film. Like, I mean, like I said, she brings up Perry White. She brings in other characters like the Riddler, and like I said, Ra's al Ghul. Even I was surprised to see this. Mixa Spitlick shows up as a puppet, and I thought, like, wow, that's actually I kind of like Mixa Spitlick as a puppet. And the other cool thing about this film is just how like weirdly comic book it feels, but also unbound by like the type of style that it wants to have. Because this is a film that it is live action, but there are a lot of like green screen backgrounds. They become very obvious that they are with how stylized the backgrounds become. But then there's also like there's 2D animation, like there's full. Like there's full animation where it almost kind of looks like rotoscope. There's kind of like limited animation where it looks like, you know, something that might pop up on YouTube. There's also like kind of like stop motion with like action figures and stuff like that. Just any wild visual they can throw at the screen to like make some of the more action driven moments feel a little bit more unique. And what I find interesting about the way that the way that like that Vera Drew sets up this type of film is that you see a lot of these superhero films where, you know, their special effects are rushed, and they don't look that good, and they look like they're just kind of like slapped together, and, you know, for all the millions of dollars they spend on these films, they don't end up looking that great. And here's a film, People's Joker, that just leans into all the different styles that do look very cheap in many aspects. But in the same way that, you know, like Vera, the character of Vera, like accepts her, you know, her identity and it becoming like the Joker Harley Quinn, this is a film that wears that kind of quirky cheapness as like a badge of honor. It says like, yes, we want to be like you know, I'm sure they didn't have this in mind, but the way that comes across is that it does feel like a do-it-yourself film that was made with like a bunch of like scrappy people who wanted to, you know, make something that was rebellious and unique and didn't feel like the other comic book movies out there. And Vera Drew very much delivers on that. I was surprised how many wild routes that this film took, and the strangeness of the comedy that it wants to have here. Like Lorne Michaels looks like a cheap CGI character, the way they frame him in this. The other thing too is there's a surprising amount of guest stars in this film who have very brief roles. Like I mentioned, like there's Tim Heidecker as Perry White. There's also Scott Eicherman as Mr. Freeze, who's not in the film that much. There's Bob Odenkirk as Bob the Goon, who I think just shows up for like a few lines and that's it. And yeah, just there's like you can tell like there was a lot of like comedic spirit put into this film. But like I said, it's also being like, you know, it's playing around with DC characters in a fun way, and I think that it speaks volumes when you compare this film to something like Todd Phillips' The Joker. Just because it seemed like Phillips's version of the Joker seemed like it was less interested in the version that the comics presented, and that he wanted to just kind of more or less present his own like kind of like Martin Scorsese film, and kind of just like, you know, dress it up in the DC Comics Joker garb just to make the film that he kind of wanted to make. And I almost kind of feel like once you do that, when, you know, you frame Joker entirely differently, I don't think this was Vera Drew's intentions. Like, she can correct me if I'm wrong in this, but it almost feels like she threw down the gauntlet at that point. Just like, look, okay, if you're going to do this with the Joker, if you're going to make a Joker that's not like the Joker and just use it to make a Scorsese film, why can't we do it for other stuff? Why can't we, you know, make it this very radical film about like the transgender experience? Why couldn't we play with these characters? And I think I love Drew's film even more than Todd Phillips' Joker, just because I think she has some affection for like these DC Comics characters, considering how much she leans into like a lot of their backstories and their characters, while still retooling it to be like this film about, you know, trying to rise up in the comic scene and take more ownership of your gender. And I think that it comes, like I said, it comes from love. It does come from you know, an interest in this material. She's clearly interested in these DC Comics characters, but wants to explore them from another angle. You know, it feels a lot like those underground comic books where like they would always talk about the versions of superheroes that, you know, like the people who were either like gay or transgender had like a different vision in their head of like how they would like to see DC Comics approach these characters and these stories. And here it just feels like that which has been granted, you know, just like all the strangeness and the and like these bizarre like visuals and different uses of characters and just the biting dialogue, just all this stuff you would never expect to see in a Warner Brothers DC Comics film. And the fact that, you know, and I think it speaks volumes to, you know, how, you know, Vera Drew made this outside of the system to make a film that feels like it's saying something and doing something more with comic book material rather than just adhering to the lore. Because like I said, you know, like we got a lot of comic book movies now that they don't adhere to the stories. They almost seem disinterested in a lot of these characters. And they're, like I said, Arthur Fleck's Joker is pretty much retooling the Joker entirely. So if we're gonna go down that route, let's go further. And Vera Drew basically just took advantage of this aspect to say, yeah, let's do more. Let's do stuff that you would never expect to see in a comic book movie. Let's provide a version of the Joker you've never seen before, and just have fun with it. Because in addition to just having fun with the characters, she also has a lot of great parodies of just Batman movies in general. Obviously she does like the parody of Arthur Fleck dancing down the stairs and smoking like a cigarette backstage, about to go out and host a comedy show. Great framing of those parodies, by the way. But then also like there's relations to like the nipples on the Batsuit from the previous Batman films. There's a almost like weirdly accurate depiction of like that scene in Suicide Squad where like Joker crashes his car with Batman riding on top and like, you know, talking to Harley. But it takes like a little bit of a different route, and I think it resonates more with how they set it up. And at the same time, there's Vera Drew's narration throughout it, which is always, you know, it never holds anything back. Like it always says like, you know, okay, you know, this is comic book lore, you know, and that this is she kind of like sets boundaries for herself, but she's also willing to like question it at several points. And it's just funny dialogue. I especially loved how when every time Vera Drew was like talking about like the type of comedy that she's going for, she brings up other comedians, and then she has to mention like, you know, oh yeah, it's kind of like in the realm of like telling stories, kind of like, you know, like kind of like what Bill Cosby would do, you know, before Bill Cosby became creepy and all that. So, and there's a lot of that throughout the film, and it's like, yeah, it's very knowing. And it's surprising how much it has like a love for the material, but also wants to retool it to tell a story that's very genuine. So in a way, for a film that wants to basically revise like Batman and the Joker, it it's amazing how much it resonates. And doesn't just feel like it's disinterested in the comics. If anything, it's more interested in the comics than like Todd Phillips was with the Joker, and willing to embrace a lot of characters that a lesser film might not. Like, I don't know. Even if this film would get made by Warner Brothers, would they allow Vera Drew to put in Mixa Spitlick at the end there? I don't know. They might, but I get the feeling there'd be huge disputes about it. But, for playing around with like the DC Comics material here, and just creating like a visually intoxicating film, it feels like it's very much the film we need. It's like what I've used this phrase a few times, but like a good film will give fans what they want, but a great film will give fans something that they never knew they wanted. And the People's Joker is very much that film. It's that film that you never knew you wanted. And I think just because you never thought it would be possible that they would make a film like this, but it is. And it feels like those, like those films that are very underground, that don't rise up to the top, that are earnest, that are genuine, but also, loaded with like satire and parody, and want to say something and shout it as loud as it can. And that is very much the People's Joker. And the fact that, I think it took about like 2 years to get to this point, and Warner Brothers trying to like strike it down before this film finally saw the light of day. But I'm glad that it did, because it does feel like a very interesting usage of these characters, while telling a very genuine story. And it's just the most unorthodox comic book movie that you will ever see. So yeah, the People's Joker is the best DC Comics film that Warner Brothers never made, and probably would never make. So yeah, it's the People's Joker is it's a wild fucking bonkers film, and I absolutely love it.